for a conversation that is going to be very dynamic, and I would love to encourage you, and no one will be offended if you can't stay for the whole session, but I would strongly encourage you to come closer because it'll make you feel more involved, and trust me, these are two speakers whose energy is going to work really beautifully when you come up closer and can really get engaged. So it's my pleasure to introduce Lisa Jarrett and Amanda Lee Evans. They are Portland-based artists, collaborators, and educators. I first met Amanda through the Across the Table, Across the Land exhibition that we did with NCECA last year that I co-curated with Michael Strand. And from that, I think, is how I met Lisa through a panel that Amanda had put together. So that's just a simple story, but it's one of those simple kinds of connections that happen out there and give you a sense of the way these two work. They think about who needs to be connected. They work with rigor, with strength, with empowering other people, and they ask really great questions. And their energy is one that's inclusive and something that I really appreciate. And I've so enjoyed getting to know them better over the last year. So Lisa Jarrett is an artist and an educator. She is an assistant professor of community and context arts at Portland State University and holds an MFA from the University of Montana in Missoula. Her intersectional practice examines the politics of difference within a variety of settings, including schools, landscapes, fictions, racial imaginaries, studios, communities, museums, galleries, walls, mountains, mirrors, floors, rivers, and lenses. She exists and makes socially engaged work within the African diaspora, and she recently discovered that her primary medium is questions. Amanda Lee Evans was raised in the Inland Empire and near Nevada City, California. She lives and works in Los Angeles, California, and Portland, Oregon. Evans is a member of the Socially Engaged Craft Collective. Their opening is this evening up at C3 Initiative in St. John's. A former Los Angeles urban ranger, and a founding member of the year-long public space intervention, Play the LA River. She has presented projects and publications at MoCA, the Portland Art Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Craft, the Museum of Contemporary Art, San Diego, and the Long Beach Museum of Art. She is also the recipient of awards including Art Place America, the Arlene Schnitzer Visual Art Prize, and the Precipice Fund. Evans holds an MFA in Art and Social Practice from Portland State University and a post-bac in ceramics from Cal State Long Beach. And we are very lucky to have them in Portland, and I'm very excited that you all get a chance to hear about some of the very exciting projects that they're working on independently and together, and to experience some of the dynamism in the way that they approach thinking and working. Welcome, Lisa and Amanda.
Thanks.
We just read questions here.
Hi, everybody. Namita, thank you for such a lovely introduction. That was beautiful. All right.
So we're organizing the talk today with a few questions that we hold together. Lisa and I really like questions. We talk about questions a lot. And then we'll both share a little bit about our work, projects we're doing here in Portland, involved with here in Portland, and then pose a few questions to you as the audience.
Please feel free to get up and move around. If you don't like where you're sitting and you want to be closer, do it. If you need to leave, no problem, we understand. Folks in the back, as you come in, please feel free to join us up front. It's no interruption. You can just kind of make yourselves comfortable. All right.
Who gets to be an artist?
Where does real art happen?
How can craft in general, and ceramics in particular, contribute to a larger conversation on the value of socially engaged youth projects?
Why are we talking about this at a ceramics conference?
Whose histories inform our knowledge and practice?
How are our own identities related to and impacted by the work we do?
What does it mean to be a white artist working in an immigrant community?
What does it mean to be a black artist working in a predominantly non-white school?
What is the value of making mistakes?
Who gets to be an artist?
All right, I'll leave Lisa up here to share a little bit with you about King School Museum of Art, which she coordinates with Harold Fletcher.
Thank you so much, Amanda. So while we are talking about our individual projects today, Amanda and I will both be sharing projects with you that have been developed and are maintained collaboratively, not only in terms of co-authorship, in terms of their design, but in terms of their participants and the students that help make these projects possible. So today I'd like to share with you a little bit about KSMoCA, or the King School Museum of Contemporary Art, which is located inside Martin Luther King Jr. School in Northeast Portland. It is a contemporary art museum inside a functioning public school. Our goal is to encourage and facilitate opportunities for students within that K through 8 range into roles that they are not typically found in, right? So our primary goals here are thinking about inclusion and access. Who gets to be an artist is actually a much broader question than just that. Sorry, I'm getting comfortable with my little mic here. The demographics for MLK School are really kind of enlightening when you think about who our primary audience actually is. There are over 400 students from Oregon's largest poverty populations in gentrified communities. And within that, we have 43% African American students, 29% Hispanic, 1% Asian, 1% Pacific Islander, wow, at least they're counting that now, 0.8% Native American, 13.8% white, and 11.5% multiple races. The school's population is predominantly low income, and almost all students receive free breakfast and lunch each day. So this is sort of, I'm sharing this demographic information, and I believe Amanda's planning to share it with you as well about the project she will talk to you about, to kind of give you a sense of the framework and the dynamic of the environment that we're working in. We are typically referring to these students as quote unquote underserved, right? And so the questions that kind of guide this particular project in collaboration with my colleague at Portland State University, Harold Fletcher, is what happens when the power structure changes. So instead of us being the curators of work into their environment, what happens if we invite them to be curators along with us? And so I'm going to give you a few examples or talk about kind of one way in which this project manifests kids as curators. And the image that you're seeing here is from an exhibit called Postcards from America, and it featured over 100 images from the Magno Photo Agency, and this was our inaugural exhibition at MLK School. What happened here is out of 1,000 images, we had, I think 9 classes of students each select 10. Right? And so the curatorial process, they got to work with the Magnum photographers, internationally renowned photographers, and really think about what they wanted to see in their school. And alongside that, we used the text, their descriptive text and language, to function as the wall labels. So instead of explaining why the kids selected the work, we had their voices as the dominant narrative within the museum space, which incidentally, because some of our images, these details, you should kind of imagine that this is a long hallway inside the school between the gym and the cafetorium, as they refer to it, or the cafeteria. This is where KSMoCA primarily resides at this point as we expand. We also have kids in our program. We think of the kids as artists, docents, and historians. And I'm going to talk to you in just a minute about a project entitled Our Civil Rights Revisited, and another project entitled Not MoMA. But this idea where that the kids are beyond just creating the objects for view or consumption or display, they're also who guide you through the exhibitions. So when you come to an opening reception, you have a child, maybe 4th grader, 5th grader, who's worked with a college student and has learned how to docent you or give you a guided tour of the work that they have made, or of the work of another artist that we may be hosting in this space. Our Civil Rights Revisited was a collection of images that the students reenacted out of the civil rights movement, some from a national scale and some from a much more local scale. The example you're seeing here is the reenactment of the March on Selma, kind of that iconic image that we see, every year about this time, once a year. And then on the image on the right, you see one of the students that modeled in this photograph, working as a docent within at the opening reception, sharing her experience, and also giving you a little bit of history lesson, like, well, what was the March on Selma? And so it's also this way that we can have integrated learning within our schools and, between art and history, social sciences, even English, language, storytelling, and an interesting way is math comes into this sometimes too. Another project that we had the opportunity to share with our students was actually designed by an artist, is she in Berkeley? In Berkeley, Stephanie Siuko, who incidentally Amanda connected us with originally. And this project is called Not MoMA. Not MoMA is a project that asks students to engage with the online collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York and to select works from that collection and recreate them. So Not MoMA is a collection of famous remakes. And I mean by any means necessary, right? Like whatever materials you have, you do your very best. So, I tend to think that the Pollock and the Klimt that these kids made, really rival anything that you would see at the actual MoMA. You would have been shocked. But it was a really interesting way to get them to engage with a contemporary art collection that they couldn't actually get to and go see. It was an interesting way to have conversations about what it means to try to understand how art functions, how art communicates through the act of making it. We had everything. It was so interesting what they wanted to look at. You wouldn't think that Joseph Beuys would make it into this, but somehow that work did as well, right? So Pollock looks fun. They knew that looked like it was fun to make. I was really surprised to see them selecting things like, highly conceptual art that, sometimes we still don't really understand today. So that's Not MoMA. And this is just another way that I'm trying to sort of share with you the scope of the project, where the kids are not only artists, they are also participators in what it is that they're selecting to make, and they are docenting you through their particular experience at the school. And we also like to connect them as much as possible with an international, or artists of international renown. So we have a newly developed artist in residence program that has started just this year. And two of the artists that we featured so far have been Carson Ellis, who's a Portland-based illustrator, children's books illustrator. You may remember her book Wildwood. Some of you may remember that very fondly. She has a number of others and just won a Caldecott Award. Also her son, in collaboration with her son, Hank Malloy. And then also Chitra Ganesh, who was just here earlier this month, maybe it was last month now, who's a Brooklyn-based artist to work with the kids. So the Artist in Residence program, I guess I could back up here and say, the entire model of our project, this idea of a contemporary art museum, we're using the expected, I guess, branches of an art museum and building off of them and modifying them according to the needs of our community and our school and our students. So we have things that are kind of more educational. We have things that are more exhibition-based. We have things like an artist in residence program where the students come and get to work in class groups, workshops designed by the artist. The artist will design a project that they'd like to have the kids participate in executing, and then we'll exhibit that work in the school. Okay. So for Carson and Hank, this project was called Introduction to Galactic Alienology, and Carson and Hank had worked together a number of years ago for the People's Biennial Project. Hank, who is an autistic 9-year-old, or at least was at the time, described these alien creatures, and his mother illustrated them. And they are really fantastic creatures. So when Carson was able to come to the school with us and work with the 4th and 5th graders, she had them go through a very similar process. She had one child blindfold another. She had one child describe an alien, the other one draw. They would title their alien, then they would switch, and they would go through that process again in partnerships. And then we displayed the results of those aliens in the school and kind of as a large-scale mural type or mural-related installations alongside Carson's originals, right? We've done something similar, so you can kind of see what some of the process is like here. We have a Portland State University college-level class where college students can come and work directly with our students at MLK Jr. School in the room and helping facilitate additional programming. They're working on installing some of these creatures here and working on some of the projections there as well. At that opening reception, it was absolutely fantastic to see how our student docents, like Miriselda on the right image, but the child on the left in that right image, could docent not only an adult through the exhibit, but another child. And that was like one of these really amazing moments, because the other thing we do, so if you were in the space, you would sort of understand that the museum is at kids' level. So if you're a grown-up, you have to get down. And it's kind of you can sort of tell here, the grown-up has to squat, but the kid, it's like it's all made, right for them. How am I doing on time? So far, so good? Okay. So this is just an example of what it might be like when a student is giving a tour in the space, and how interesting it is to see families bring their children, and the children recognize that this is a space for them, and that they run up to other kids that are willing to talk to them about things, give them drawings, help them participate and understand. And again, consistently thinking about access and relevance, right? How we make this work more accessible to the community that it lives within, and how we make this work more relevant to the day-to-day experiences of those folks that are our actual community members. Chitra Ganesh's workshop was called Everyday Superheroes, and we showed that work in conjunction with her work. She shipped to us from New York some original drawings and some digital prints of comic-based work that we installed at the school. And we had our Portland State University students that wanted to develop a handout to give to the kids to create exposure across the school, because not everybody was going to get to do the workshop with her. So they made a coloring book / zine that was all about Chitra, and we handed it out to the kids, and they got to take this home, and it was kind of a PR piece, a fun piece, an interactive piece that the kids really responded to. And then we had Chitra come in and talk to the students about her work. Her work is really quite challenging for a school environment, right? Because a lot of the themes that she's dealing with, not only are they, feminism, intersectionality, race, identity, her experience as a South Asian American woman, all of these different things come into play. But then, in elementary schools, it's like the body, so you wonder where body shame comes from. You can't, it's really, it's not really permissible to see, you don't see nudity, right? In public elementary school settings. So we had to do some really interesting work around kind of making sure the teachers understood we weren't trying to expose the students to anything inappropriate. But it turned out to be an absolutely stellar exhibition. It is still on view if you are here in Portland. During school days after spring break, you can come down and check out the exhibit, although you won't get the charm of the docent tour. The last thing we're trying to think about, and this is, I think, a great place of questions, is kids as community partners and activists. And so here I'm going to talk about just one project briefly. So when we think about our students within this program as community partners and potentially activists, how do we make this their work and not just sort of our expectation of what that kind of work might look like for kids? That's a constant and ongoing question for us in this project. In this example, we had the students, we were supported by the Jordan D. Schnitzer Family Foundation. We're able to bring the students to an amazing exhibit at Portland Art Museum called about Andy Warhol, you can imagine, right? It was fantastic. Jordan's collection is phenomenal. But then the kids fell in love with the Endangered Species Suite. And that suite, it's essentially 10 images of animals that were endangered on the endangered species list 1983 and before. They really fell in love with that work. They're 4th grade, they're 5th grade, they love animals, they love images of them. But when they understood that this could be about something they were also learning in science, they were intrigued. And we said, well, how can we help them engage not only more deeply with the artist, but also with thinking about art's opportunity and ability to affect change in the greater world, right? So we had an artist, one of our colleagues, Lauren Moran, come and work with the kids and teach them how to screen print. Sorry, I advanced too quickly. They got to pull their own screen prints, each of an endangered species animal that was added to the list post-1983. We have a beautiful permanent installation in the museum now that just went up last week, so I'm sorry I don't have an image. And we did live screen printing with the kids at the opening reception. So once again, they're facilitating you through these processes, and you could take home a screen print that you got to make at that opening. Getting them into galleries where they get to learn about kind of like the history of civil rights, getting them into museums. These are students that prior to these experiences had never had these kinds of art experiences. And we certainly don't mean to privilege the experiences of the Contemporary Art Museum or galleries is the only way that a student can engage with art in the world and art can be meaningful, but we do want them to have an ability or an opportunity to have enough exposure so that they understand what we are working together with them to build in their school. So thank you so much. That's just a little bit about KSMoCA. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague Amanda, and she will share with you another amazing project. My project is amazing. Yes, I said it. But you will hear about another amazing project that's happening at Cherry Blossom Estates. Thank you so much.
I'm Amanda. I was raised in a rural, predominantly white community in Northern California. And the first time I visited an art gallery or an art museum was when I went to college and was assigned to go do so for a freshman art class in Los Angeles. And once I graduated from undergrad, I had the opportunity to work at a very high-end blue-chip art gallery for a couple years before moving up to Portland. And I just mentioned this because the art world has never been a place where I completely feel comfortable. It feels like a foreign place because it's not a place that I experienced in my childhood. And the question we mentioned earlier about who gets to be an artist and where does art happen comes up for me quite a bit in my own practice as I think about what does artwork mean, what is it doing in the world, who is it for, and what's the economy around it. So I am the artist in residence at Cherry Blossom Estates, which is a 120-unit affordable housing apartment complex in East Portland, Oregon. It primarily serves single parents, immigrant and refugee families, senior citizens, and people with disabilities. Residents must make less than 60% of the median income of the area in order to qualify to live there. There's a very low turnover rate in the apartment complex, and many people have lived there for years and years and years since the building opened 17 years ago. In Portland, the typical turnover rate for apartments is 60% a year. In Cherry Blossom, it's 10% a year. And this housing complex is in East Portland, not to be confused with Northeast Portland, which is where we are now. We're on the east side of the river, so I guess technically we're in East Portland, but to get to East Portland, you go way, way far east to the other side of the 205 freeway. And it's feels like a different city on that side of the freeway. The Portland you experience here at the conference is artisanal beer and coffee joints on every corner, wide bike lanes, painted green, compost bins, LEED certified condos, etc. A lot of those Portlandia stereotypes don't exist in East Portland. Behind Cherry Blossom, there's a Bed Bath & Beyond and Best Buy. Because of this, for many different reasons, it feels that these two Portlands don't often meet, or when they do meet, there are some differences. And also because of this, although Portland has a reputation as being a very creative community with lots of art happening, which is true, often those art projects don't reach into East Portland. All right, so how did I stumble into this position? The residency I'm in at Cherry Blossom Estates is sponsored by Community Engagement, which is a nonprofit tightly partnered with Affordable Housing Access. The program's relatively new, and there are 4 artists in the program total. I'm the only artist in Portland. The other artists are in Santa Ana, California, and Phoenix, California. And it's directed by a woman named Jessica Probosky, who has a background in urban planning, and someone I really respect is she talks a lot about long-term engagement in a community and what it means to be an artist in an art space and what happens when an artist leaves that space. In this residency program, residents are provided with a place to live, a studio, a small stipend, and a budget to work for a year. But I am the newest artist in the program, just hitting my 6-month mark, and all of the other residents in the program, the other 4 artists, have renewed for a second, 3rd year. I'm hoping to continue if I can. And especially with the value that community engagement has placed on long-term presence in a community, building reciprocal and accountable relationships and trust with community members is very important. Things are slow and they take time, and that's something, as ceramic artists, I think many of you understand. One project that I've been really excited about in the community is a garden project that is led by some of the kids at Cherry Blossom. This is a group of kids that I spend most of my time with at Cherry Blossom, between kindergarten and about 8th grade. They're from families from all over the world. The two girls you see in the foreground on the left are twins from Nepal, families from Mexico, Ghana, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and many other parts of the world. The garden has become a central gathering space in the community. It's a community garden that just was started last year in the complex's former pool. A lot of people in the complex really loved the pool, and right as I arrived, the pool was getting filled in with dirt. It's been kind of a sore spot in the community, but it's been turning into a really exciting and amazing project. The first few months when I arrived, the garden was just kind of settling into its fall season, and some kids in the apartment building were interested in building a space that they could have as their own. Some of these boys you see in the picture had built forts sort of scattered throughout the complex that always seemed to be getting taken down by the maintenance crew at the complex. So we had the idea together to build a greenhouse where we could grow some plants, but also have as a space for other types of projects. I'm a big believer in kids using tools and hammers and drills and things like that, and the greenhouse that we've been building together has been built completely collaboratively with among about 20 different kids. It's been a pretty ambitious project to pull off because we're building it together, which means that it's slow. I have a background in sculpture and building, and I could come and build this, but it wouldn't mean the same thing as if we were to build it together. So we build it a little bit by bit, and we've built it starting in September and are about to finish. It's been a little slow for us because the weather's been pretty crummy this winter in Portland, but it's all built with materials that we've scavenged off of Craigslist and across the street at the Habitat for Humanity restore. A lot of the materials that we use are materials that are being pulled out of old houses right now in Portland that are being revitalized, and a lot of communities are being displaced as this gentrification is happening. We're reclaiming those materials in our greenhouse and using them. We also just had a community garden meeting this past week, and interest since last year has grown 300%. So with these boys, we're building lots and lots of new boxes for more space in the garden, which I'm really, really excited about. One of our goals this year, and one of the things we want to do with the greenhouse, is to plant something in the garden from every country that's represented at Cherry Blossom. Hopefully the greenhouse will help with the Portland climate for some of the warmer countries. And although I've been working a lot with the kids, and it's been a great entry point into a lot of enthusiasm around new projects. This is an apartment building. This is a home to many people. So although many of the projects are focused around youth, parents and little brothers and sisters are involved in these projects as well. A typical week at Cherry Blossom might be Monday morning, a one-on-one throwing lesson with someone from Afghanistan who's trying to make a large yogurt fermentation jar. In the afternoon, a garden and art club with elementary and junior high youth. Tuesday is a studio and curatorial day, curating some of the galleries in the complex. Wednesday is a morning art group for women who are staying home. Thursday is an after-school program teaching about and practicing contemporary art, and Friday is another greenhouse and garden time. And I'm a little wary as I'm talking about Cherry Blossom of thinking about how I might romanticize this community. And, you know, there are lots of different families coming from lots of different places who maybe don't connect with each other, maybe they do. But it's people's homes and it's people's lives. It's not trivial to be working together to build a garden or to be sharing a ceramic night together. One of the projects that's become really significant to me this year is the women's art group that meets on Wednesday mornings. The image on the left is of Jadira and Edna, 2 women who come every week to the group. And they're both originally from Mexico. And in that group, the projects that we do together are led by community interests. So we started out with a ceramic project looking at styles of ceramic pottery from different regions of Mexico and how different styles are similar and different. And each woman did some research on the pottery from the community that they're from and worked in that style. A lot of women in the group are also really interested in crochet, which I do not have the patience for, so not very good at, which is great because they're able to lead the sessions that they're interested in. So I see myself in a lot of the programs at Cherry Blossom as more of a facilitator than as a leader. And this group, I feel, really is that way. When a new idea for a project comes up, the person who is really passionate about that idea leads that project and teaches what they're interested in. Another project that has been really exciting to me is identifying spaces in the complex where we could showcase some of the work that we've been doing together. There are 8 laundry rooms in the complex that have really nice, clean white walls and good lighting, and there are a lot of people in the complex who identify as artists. So this is a project that we curated this fall with a woman on the left, an artist, Christina Dickens, who's lived in the complex for the last 17 years. And the exhibition is a collection of drawings that she has made since 1992 of her cat, flowers, and things that are important to her, object studies from different moments in her life. And this is the first exhibition that Christina has had of her work. And since then, she has been developing a new body of work for a new show to be having later this fall. This is an image of another exhibition that we curated called Building Democracy that was in response to the election. A lot of the kids in the complex were worried and concerned about a lot of the turmoil in the country following the election, so we decided to talk about it and process that. We just started with the prompt, if I were president, I would. And students filled in drawings based on that prompt. On the left is Heli, and she wrote, if I were president, I would let everyone stay in the United States for freedom. So in this exhibition, we framed each work, and then the students curated where each work would go in the laundry room and which laundry room it would go in. In my role at Cherry Blossom, I've been wearing a lot of different hats. Sometimes I'm an educator, sometimes a community organizer or facilitator. Often I'm making a lot of mistakes along the way, as all of these things are coming simultaneously. A question that I ask myself a lot is, what am I doing as a middle-class white person with an MFA in this space? Which I think is a fair and important question to be asking. It's complicated, and it's important to acknowledge. Namely, I'm not from this community. I'm not an immigrant or refugee. I'm not Black. I don't have a disability. I'm not a single parent. All of these factors make it impossible for me to understand those experiences and bring a lot of mistakes along the way. But I want the work at Cherry Blossom to be about redefining definitions of who gets to be an artist and where the art community exists, and who is it for. I believe in building an art world that's less hierarchical and less focused on pedigree. At the same time, I feel this is true with the ceramics community. I'd like to see the ceramics community to expand in this way as well. Who isn't at the table and why? Why are we resisting and challenging what exists? And when will the art world reflect that community? Those are all questions that come up for me in this work. The last thing I want to mention is just a few other projects that the kids and I are working on right now. These are some portraits that were taken by youth with each other in a project where students are interviewing each other for a newspaper that is passed out quarterly to the complex. And last month, for Black History Month, each week in the after-school program, students learned about and practiced in the style of a contemporary African-American artist. The image on the right is a painting by Kehinde Wiley, and on the left is an in-progress painting of Kevin Gates by Kaibar. And so moving forward, I am really interested in works that continue to respond to community-led initiatives. In working in Cherry Blossom, I've tried a lot of things. Some of them work and some don't, and the only ones that work are ones that people are actually interested in. And I feel that that's a really important gauge for me in coordinating projects in a community that I'm new to. It's a really honest and really rapid mirror of what values are and what is important. Thank you.
Folks over there, we're going to be here for a minute, so if you can't see, you might want to move. If you don't mind just hearing and not seeing, but feel free to move. Okay. We wanted to spend a few minutes. Thanks so much, Amanda. It's actually really nice to hear your colleagues present about their work, because we spend so much time busy and running around. We don't actually just stop and listen. So thank you. I just learned a lot. We thought we would also spend some time in dialogue, because so much of the way that both Amanda and I work is collaboratively. So we're not transitioning into Q&A just yet. In fact, we have a different way we'd like to approach the question portion of our panel this afternoon as well, or our conversation this afternoon. But we wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the similarities and differences between our two projects, because while they are both really centered on empowering our youth, thinking about what is culturally and ethically relevant within our communities, we're also working in some pretty different spaces when we stop to think about it. Public versus private, etc. So we thought we would just spend a few minutes kind of talking to each other and doing a little more learning kind of with you and in front of you about our projects before we move into asking you guys to participate in thinking through some questions as well. Okay? All right. So life cycles, when we think about similarities and differences across time in the context of socially engaged artistic practices, and with a specific eye to these two projects, Amanda and I were really struck by how similar certain aspects of our work is, and just how dramatically different other aspects are. Amanda, what was one of the things that came up for you pretty immediately when we started talking about similarity?
With the idea of life cycles, I was thinking, is this on? Okay. I was thinking about what does it mean to sit with a project and sustain it long term over time for more than just a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. You've been with KSMoCA for 3 years, but it's But before KSMoCA existed, there was many years of groundwork that led to that.
Probably 4 years before, probably a good 4 years before the project as it currently stands, right? There's that groundwork laid, yep.
So with that, I was just thinking about how is that work sustained over time, and what, given the different timelines for a project, what does that mean for what's possible? Yeah.
I think it's really interesting to think about that, because both of our projects are interested in sustainability over time, right? How do you have an impact that isn't just sort of like, yes, I came in and I made paper turkeys with you today and it was such a great experience, and now you've got that great paper turkey and now we can all go home, right? But how you can create an experience that's a little more, has a lifespan, right? So even projects that might happen in the short term might have a begin and an end date. How do we create them in a way that's not where they stop having sort of relevance within the communities that we're working within, and that we are not trying to define what we think those experiences are, but that we are actually facilitating responsive artistic experiences within these groups. And then long term, you know, it's sort of like if we walked away, what of our projects would be, what would remain? And I don't necessarily mean that physically, but it's a really interesting question, and posing it as a question sometimes I know helps me think about how things are happening in the now, when I think about how that impact might continue in the future. We have this one question that we kind of came back to that was interesting. If we had to measure impact for our projects, like what would we measure and how? You know, and measurement comes up often when you're dealing with fundraising for art projects. I see so many heads nodding right now. But when you kind of take it out of that the financial domain, you bring it back to the project, we would think about, well, what is it that we would want to measure? What's measurable? What's worth measuring? It's kind of a lot like our question about who gets to be an artist and what does that mean? Yeah. What do you think are some of the biggest differences between our work?
Well, certainly you're working in an elementary school or a K-8 school, which is a public space, and I am working in a private space, which are people's homes. Also, you're an institution, and I'm an individual, and that really influences the scope of what's possible and the way that we can approach projects that are maybe having a public audience or dealing in education.
And it seems like when I hear you talk about Cherry Blossom Estates too, like you have a much, you know, all of our participants are students, right, of the school. They come there every day. They understand that schedule, things of that nature. But it seems like at Cherry Blossom Estates, you have this really phenomenal opportunity to work with entire families at different times of day, at different stages of life. How, as an artist, do you have to think about boundaries for yourself within that setting?
Yeah, I mean, one boundary that I give myself is that I don't come on weekends because I think, I'm sometimes there on weekends because my studio's there, but I also don't want to be too annoying, like be around all the time. But I am a part of the community and a resident in the community, but because of that, I have noticed that it's taken time from getting to know some kids than to maybe becoming friends with parents and building friendship with an entire family. And, you know, if the kids are interested in something, then maybe sometimes parents are too, but maybe not. And I'm just interested in getting to know some adults in the community as well who don't have kids, and more importantly, the intergenerational relationships that come up through these projects. Like with the community garden meeting that we had, there was an 11-year-old who signed up for a community garden spot who really, really wants to plant tomatoes this year. And there was a guy who's like 89 years old who's also signed up for a plot, who knows a lot about gardening, who will be in the garden with him as they're growing together.
I love it. It's interesting because I can invite you all to KSMoCA, right? It has that public piece. But I have been to Cherry Blossom Estates by invitation from Amanda, but as I'm talking to you now, it's occurring to me that it's not only is it not a public space, it's one you can't go to unless you live there. And, I mean, in theory, right? I think that's really interesting because I'm thinking about this other conversation Amanda and I have been having a lot has been about trust building within these communities because socially engaged projects require a lot of building trust over time, and I really admire what you've done at Cherry Blossom Estates in such a short amount of time. A lot of building trust with institutions is about being consistent and being present. Interestingly, that's also the way you build trust with children, consistency and presence, sort of doing what you say you're going to do. But I hadn't quite thought about it in this way, that all of the impact that's happening around your project is felt first and foremost by the families and people who call Cherry Blossom Estates home.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a good question about the idea of audience, too, because right now I'm struggling with when I tell someone about this residency who, isn't from Cherry Blossom, who wants to come visit. I'm like, okay, when's like an appropriate time for that to happen? Because a lot of this work, the audience, and even to give this talk, a lot of the audience for this work is the community. So I'm concerned about like ways that projects can put someone on display when they're not, they're not the subject. Like community members aren't the subject of the work. We're making the work together. But at KSMoCA, like students are the audience, but also their families in the broader King neighborhood too.
And there's not the same, there's certainly expectations around safety for children in our public school system, but privacy, in certain circumstances, there are always exceptions, but privacy doesn't have the same role as it does in a private or home setting, right? The public school, right? Public school. So we know our kids are going to be exposed to different things and interacting with different people, and people might be coming to visit, and you might not know every move that your child makes during their school day. But at home, that's a very different thing. And so a lot of the way we've built trust through KSMoCA and how it's extended into the community has been through the children's excitement, what they tell their families when they go home. But if the parents and siblings or grandparents, aunts, uncles, etc., don't come to the school, it sort of remains a relationship between us and those those students in a public school. It's not elementary school because there's also middle school, but that's why I keep getting caught over elementary school, just so you all know. Thank you. So another question, and we're going to move, this is just kind of a closing thing as we kind of transition into the next stage of this for us, is kind of how we build, what did we know before and what do we know now? And if nothing else, I think that comes up for Amanda and I all the time with the projects that we develop, both within KSMoCA and Cherry Blossom Estates, but also within the other projects that she and I have collaborated on in the past. One of those projects that we did most recently was called Talk to Everyone and Everything About Race. And it was another project based on questions, and using this kind of position of inquiry as a guiding principle instead of authority. So instead of what we know, what we don't know becomes the way we move into developing things. There's actually a really strong relationship to that and how we learn art, right? Like as a tactile sort of activity-related endeavor. And so we thought that we would talk just a minute about that and how what we are doing in these two more community-based projects has informed other projects that we participate in and have collaborated on. Amanda, I'm gonna let you talk about that while I dig through my bag and get the deck.
Okay. Well, I guess talking about how this has both influenced our own practice, we both have a background in craft. I particularly have a background in ceramics, you with craft in general. And I think craft definitely informs the way that we think about socially engaged art projects, as craft is traditionally a practice built by communities collectively. And then also, we both have kind of agreed that questions are a medium that we're interested in. And yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, even this idea of how we think about and talk about race, you'll notice that we conveniently did not mention race even once in any of our talking about either of our projects. And I think that's a very intentional choice. Race is relevant to our projects by nature of the world and society that we live in, and by sort of definition. We did present our demographics. But we're really interested in this, in using these questions within these communities to help further the way people think about race, what kind of dialogues are possible around race within communities, particularly when we think about our own identities integrated and rubbing up against the identities of different bodies. Children are, the most vulnerable. When you add a racial or ethnic or cultural variety to that, the vulnerability increases significantly, along with gender, along with sexuality, all of the kinds of citizen status, if you will, in our current, in our present moment, right? So Amanda and I had worked on a project previously. We don't have images, we forgot, but it was a project based entirely on questions, questions that we intend for folks to pose to people or places or ideas about race, and it's meant to sort of be a reflective process that it also is iterative. It comes with a list of over 100 sites, potential sites for engaging in these conversations. And so as we were both already in these other projects while we were developing this project with two of our other collaborators. And as we were preparing for our talk here, we thought, wow, this really has been a defining force in the way that we think about our work and our practices. So we were hoping to invite you all to kind of participate in that kind of question-based inquiry as we think through some of these ideas. Of course, there are questions like, how do we build a more accessible clay community? But we thought it might be really nice if we could invite you guys each in small groups to think about this.
So just take maybe 2 minutes to turn to 2 or 3 people next to you and consider this question and then the question on the screen. How can craft in general and ceramics in particular contribute to the larger conversation about socially engaged youth projects? How can we build a more accessible clay community?
And this doesn't have to be a complex sort of thing. This is like, hey, what question came to mind while they were talking? What things popped up in my head? And then we just really will invite one person from the group to step up to the mic here and say, this was a question. There's no expectation of answers. It's really more about just thoughtful consideration and reversing the way you think about things from having to make a statement to thinking about what you'd like to investigate more. Questions can be vulnerable places, and we're actually inviting that as well. So, let's see. If you don't know the person next to you, he left you, didn't he? Just like that. There's a wonderful person right behind you that would love to chat with you. You 3 here. Would you like to join someone up here just for a minute? Okay. Folks in the back, do you guys feel comfortable? And then, gorgeous human with the bun, would you like, you have some friends over there? Okay, sounds great.
I'm watching the clock. probably too nervous. You did great. I got really thrown off by this room.
It's a very
And the echo.
yeah, because it bounces off the wall. You have 1 more minute. 1 more minute. Okay, everybody. We hear some really great conversations happening in the room. Thank you so much. All that we would like to invite you to do is to just step up to the mic, one person out of your group even, or a couple people if you're so inclined. And the mic is not to make you nervous, but just so that we can make sure that everybody's voice is heard and captured. If we could invite you to do that now and share your questions with the room, we would be in great shape. That means stop talking to each other and come to the mic. I know you all hear me.
You heard her.
I can see you hearing me and then ignoring me.
Pick your person to go to the mic.
Hello.
Thank you.
Okay. I guess we wanted to know, how do we get the educators to allocate the funds towards the arts?
How do we get the educators to allocate funds toward the arts?
The overall, like just the school boards, like how do we get them to understand that art is important in the school system?
That's a great question. Thank you. Yes. Anybody from this group here in the front want to share a question or two? Yeah, that'd be great.
I love what you're both doing, by the way,
Oh,
because it kind of ties into something I started maybe last year, the year before, and it was kind of like workshops out of my house called Parents and Art Kids. I'm finishing up my BFA in ceramics right now, and I'm going into my credential program in the fall. And I grew up in an inner city, city in LA, and I grew up knowing that if we wanted anything extracurricular or artistic or of the arts, my parents had to drive us to a more affluent city. And so with that being said, and noticing that like where I was growing up needed this somehow, I just started doing it at home with my family, which of course is also problematic sometimes because it's hard. And so I guess the question I'm posing is, obviously I'm taking matters into my own hands, but then it kind of ties along with this. So how can I like make this on a larger scale where I can find a space and I can really start to work with something that is not just out of my pockets or donation, that I've collected through scraps and through being a hoarder and, knowing that there's potential in everything when you see it. But how to, to really try to push this idea even farther to make it what I really envision.
That's a wonderful question, too. Thank you. I hope that there are more questions in the room, and that this sparks additional conversation, and that you stay really vocal about it. And the questions that you pose, I think, are really great ones. When you ask them as questions, you'll be surprised how much talking people are willing to do. Unfortunately, we are out of time for today, but we are so grateful to you all for coming and sharing this space with us. We wish you a fantastic afternoon. Have a great conference. And,
Come to the Socially Engaged Craft Collective opening at C3, which started 2 minutes ago.
Amanda's got another opening like right now, literally. So thank you guys again. We hope you have a great day. Thanks for your time.